Hi. Um, just to be sure, can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? Just to be sure that you can hear me. Fantastic. My name is Hamzat Lawal, but I'm a young funky guy and I like to be called Hamza. I'm the founder and chief executive of Connected Development, and Connected Development is a non-governmental organization that empowers marginalized communities with access to information. We do this by creating platforms for informed debate between government and the people, particularly at the grassroots, while holding government to account, using our social accountability movement called Follow the Money. So, Follow the Money tries to answer where funds are coming from, where they're going to, and most importantly, how judiciously these funds are being utilized. Today, we're talking about an interesting topic that is close to my heart about storytelling for career growth. And since it's about storytelling, allow me the honor to tell you a few stories if time permits. And I'll start with my own personal journey and growth and how this has led to my own career path. In 2010, there was lead poisoning that ravaged northern Nigeria in Zamfara state. At that time, it was reported that over 400 children had died due to artisanal mining. In 2012, I was struggling to get information on what has happened for 2 years because at that time, billions of naira was released to the governments, both at federal and state level. I went to the Ministry of Mines and Solid Minerals. I took a ride to the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Environment. I was asking simple questions. Please, can someone provide me with information on how government responded to this emergency and crisis and how public resources was used to ensure that the environment got cleaned and sick children got free medical needs? No one could provide me this information. From the Department of Public Health to the Department of Epidemiology to the Department of Pollution Control, no one was giving me information. It was a bit frustrating for me. So I took a ride going to Zamfara State. And just to put this into context, from Abuja to Gusau is 7 hours by road under 42 degrees centigrade. From Gusau to Anka is 3.5 hours by road, terrible road. And then from Anka to Bagega is 4.5 hours by road. And at that time, you can only go on a horse, a camel, a donkey, or a motorbike. So I rode on a motorbike. When I got to this community, I found out that no single cent of all the millions of dollars that was released got to this community, or no single kobo of all the billions of naira that was released. I also found out that over 700 children had lost their lives, and 1,500 children were very sick and at the verge of losing their life. So what I did at that time, and as a young person who I believe we're all a technology generation, so we're connected via technology right now. I took my mobile phone and with the permission of the community and the members in this community, I took pictures, I took videos, and I took audios. Right now, a lot of you will call them amateur pictures and videos. But these pictures and videos informed a campaign I launched on social media with the hashtag Save Bagega. And what I did was to aggregate all this information I got, connecting the realities of this community to everyday people on Twitter and Facebook using the hashtag SaveBagega. And in less than 48 hours, RFI, and then found her way to channels, NTA, AIT, and other local radio and TV stations. In less than 72 hours, the then President Goodluck Jonathan, approved a sum of $5.3 million. Today, it's close to a billion naira. But then I got to understand the difference between approval, releases, and utilization. 2 weeks after Mr. President made the announcement of this approval, the money did not move from the Ministry of Finance to the three government MDs. And then we now launched another campaign focused on the Ministry of Finance to expedite the release and disbursement of these resources. When these resources was disbursed, what I did was, for all my trip back and forth from Abuja to Bagega community, I always go with the costed work plan that informed this $5.3 million. One is to empower them with this information, but two is for them to also demand their own right and be prepared to take ownership of government intervention. Today, you have state-of-the-art road, tiled road to this community. Today, the only primary school have been rehabilitated. They even have a computer laboratory. Today, you have access to mobile network, to service providers in this community. But in doing the work that we did, we were able to also document the needs of this community, where the Ministry of Water Resources have provided 10 solar-powered borehole. So, from Save Bagega, Follow the Money has evolved into a Pan-African grassroots movement in Kenya, in the Gambia, in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, Liberia, in various African countries, leading campaigns and engaging citizens. But today, if you want to talk about the work that you do, the perfect way to share this is by telling stories, by connecting what you do and the impact and some of the results you get. A lot of employers right now look out for people who can tell compelling story, people who can navigate through storytelling and convince clients or get grants from donors or even recruit more people into the vision and mission of various organizations. And maybe I should take you through one last personal story. When I started my career, first I was a teacher, and then I got a job at a cyber cafe to become a computer attendant. My role at that time was to sell tickets, air tickets, internet tickets to users. My boss at that time was a computer engineer. So usually people bring their laptop to the office and then he installed softwares, and if it's a hardware problem, he replaced the parts. And then from observing him, I started learning how to install softwares in computers and troubleshoot. There was a day my boss was not around and a client walked in with his laptop and said he needed an antivirus. I told him it was going to cost him 20,000 naira for this installation. So what he said, okay, young man, go ahead and install. So it took me less than 20 minutes to install antivirus and update, the software and register it for 1 year. And afterwards, I gave him his laptop. He checked and saw everything was fine. And then he told me, I told him, well, his bill is 20,000. And he told me, why would he pay a young man like me 20,000 naira for just less than 30 minutes? That I did not buy anything or change anything from the laptop. And just not to go into any sort of argument with him, he offered to pay me 2,000 naira. And I collected the money. And the next day, another client came and said he needed an antivirus on his laptop because of my experience and the lessons I've learned. So I told this client that it was going to take him 2 days to install this antivirus, that he was going to leave his laptop and come back in 2 days, and that it was going to cost him 20,000 naira. So he said, okay, he left his laptop. When he left, it took me less than 30 minutes to install the antivirus and update the software and register it. So I just used the laptop or kept it safe. 2 days later, he came. I gave him his laptop. He checked it and it was fine. And he paid me 20,000. What that lesson taught me was people sometimes pay you for time rather than paying you for the value and or service that you render. So they, the first client was not willing to part away with 20,000, not because I didn't do the job, but because he felt 20,000 was too much to pay a young guy. Imagine how I looked about 10 years ago. And now I'm still young and I look small. So again, the lesson about life is being able to put yourself in every story, each and every story, put yourself in that story and tell the story while sharing perspective. And in sharing perspective, you also need to understand that the art of storytelling, it's the art of positivity. And everything happens in your head. First, you have to visualize. Whatever story you are telling, first, you have to frame it and visualize it in your mind. And then share it by telling and sharing perspective. Mind you, your perspective would be different from other people's perspective, but always leave an open mind, because to be a storyteller or to tell a compelling story that connects to your career, you must always have an open mind, because Two people could be in the same room but have different overview, different view of the conversation happening. It's for you to open your mind and collect feedback, but also make sure in telling story, you must be in the centerpiece of that story. Because without you as a piece in the story, then the story will not make any meaning. And you know, if you are in the story, what it means is it's not a second person story. You're telling a story of yourself, putting yourself in that story, but most importantly, blowing people's minds
Yeah,
by sharing how you go through
so
your
I'm back.
journey.
Yeah, I'm back. I guess there was a little people couldn't hear me. There was a little audio issue, so I had to leave and join back. But I've been following the session, amazing session. So we can go on. I just thought to say I'm back. Yes.
Oh, thank you, and welcome back, Olaoluwa. And maybe before we go into the conversation with Olaoluwa, let me end by saying, as young people right now, skill is one of your biggest assets. Skill, network, but most importantly is how you're able to also build confidence. Because if you want to tell story, first you must have that self-awareness and self-confidence, because you're talking about speaking to someone probably you've never met in your life. And like the saying go, the first impression matters. So in 5 minutes, you should be able to aggregate your pitch, your story, and put yourself in the centerpiece. So again, if you're able to sell that story and then your client or the donor wants to test you, and then engage you, it's your skill that connects to that story that would now take you to the next level. So as young people, as much as we go to school and we get our certificates, you must also expose yourself to getting skill. And in getting skill, how do you test your skill? We know that in the labor market, and with the impact of COVID-19, there are less jobs. Why not put yourself in to volunteer? Why not contribute to your own role and play a part in humanity by volunteering? And mind you, volunteering is also job experience, because in your curriculum, you can add that you volunteered in cleaning up the environment, or you volunteered for a non-for-profit organization that helps children or help women. And then you can even get a reference letter from this organization, or you get a recommendation letter when you're leaving. So it's important that you build your network. And in volunteering, you meet a lot of people and you're exposed to a lot of experiences, and you add value most importantly. And every employer wants to employ someone who has a touch of humanitarian activism. Thank you, Oluwa. Oluwa, you can take it up from here.
Okay, so it's been an amazing session. Sorry, I guess people couldn't hear me earlier. I was trying to give a briefing to what we're going to be doing today, talking about Jobberman, how we are the number one center for recruiting in Nigeria. We have over 2 million job seekers in our database and over 60,000 employers. And I was giving a briefing to MC Code, our speaker for today, and I guess you would see his background from from how the conversation has been going. He's the chief executive for Connected Development. He's worked in over 40 different African countries over the last 9 years. And he's been telling stories for marginalized communities to help people live better lives. But now, to try to put perspective to our conversation today, we are saying, yes, storytelling can be used in so many ways. It can be used in so many industries. But we are going to try to see them in different lights. One, how can we use storytelling to grow our careers? How can we use storytelling to position ourselves? How can we use storytelling to expose ourselves to opportunities and get those opportunities? So I'm sure our viewers are from different backgrounds. Some people are job seekers. A good number of them are trying to say, "Oh, I'm trying to get a job." I know you've talked about volunteering, how you meet people. So I'm in trying to give this conversation a perspective. What are the ways job seekers and career starters can leverage on storytelling? Or let's start from there. Yeah, can leverage on storytelling. Then we'll go into more specifics.
Did we lose you, Olaoluwa?
No, I'm still here. I'm still here.
I
Can
feel
you
like
hear
we
me?
lost you a bit. So the question I got is, how can we use storytelling to grow our career? Every employer today wants someone who can share the vision of his or her organization, someone who can put their goods and services into humanizing their goods and services. So, for instance, if you work in production, how are you able to talk to your clients and share how your production or how supplying your goods and services, or if you work at haulage, or even if you work at the civil society space, or even humanitarian space, how is your work contributing towards reducing the crisis in the northeast, for instance? Or how are you even mediating between, farmer and header conflict? How is your organization brokering peace? Or how do you take stories of citizens to the front of lawmakers? I remember when we did when we collaborated campaign in 2017 to get the National Health Act to be passed. And what we did was to minister petition. And in administering this petition, we were asking citizens, so how do you pay for medical bills? Do you pay from out of pocket or you have health insurance? And if you pay from out of pocket, how much does it cost you on an average every month as a family person? And so we took all this information and went to the National Assembly, and at the lobby of the National Assembly, and as young people, we're very innovative and have so much energy. We're just telling lawmakers, we've been to your constituency, and your constituents, they don't have access to universal health coverage. And if you sign this bill into law, what it means is your constituents who pays from out of pocket would now be covered in a health insurance scheme, and then there will be less pressure on you as a lawmaker. Because again, when you sell
Yes, we're having little network issue there. Okay, just to recap a few things Anzi said.
connect to
I know we
that
talked
person,
about.
and as you connect to the person, you must also connect, to the person's community and to the country at large. And in doing that, you're able to mobilize mass number of policymakers to pass a bill, but then put pressure on Mr. President to sign. And that's how we're able to do that. So again, it's putting, as much as you're putting yourself in the story, you must be able to put, the person who benefits and the person who you're selling this product to into the story. Because again, you're selling a vision. Sometimes you're telling a story about something that they cannot see, they cannot feel or touch. But when you tell it in a compelling manner, the way the human mind works is they put themselves in that story and close their eyes, and it will be as if they're watching a movie that you are retelling.
Okay, great. Now you talked about connecting to the
I
person.
lost your audio again, so I can't
Okay,
hear you, Olaoluwa.
can you hear me
I
now?
can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Okay, if you can hear me, okay, I think we're
Can
back
you hear
now.
me?
Yes, I can
So I
hear you
can't
now.
hear you.
Okay,
I think it's
I
your
can hear
audio.
you.
For some weird reason, I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me? Is it better?
No, I can't hear you still. Can you try? Oh, interesting. I think we're trying to get Olaloye back. But since I
Okay, I think it's better now. Can you hear me now? Um, okay. Okay, so I think let me just take it from what he has said. Then when he joins back, we'll just take questions from the audience. So he talked about skills, confidence. He talked about connecting to the person. So in trying to tell a story, in trying to maybe connect to a recruiter or connect to people, in telling your story, in selling yourself, you should learn how to really connect with them. You should learn how to connect to your community, how to connect to that person. You talked about building confidence and testing your storytelling skills. So I think we're going to take more questions when it comes. But from all that he said, what are our questions? I think we can start from that. What are the questions you have around storytelling? Whether it's for career, for your business, for community, whatever storytelling challenges you think you have, let's take it from there. Amzi will join us in a few minutes, then we'll round it up. So in terms of storytelling, he said a number of things. He gave examples of stories he started to tell at different stages in his work. And he's also talked about building the skill, how you can learn through volunteering. And some people have a question that they really don't have stories. And I think one of the things we'll get to see is how can you develop your story? Because stories can be used in so many ways. In so many ways. So one of the things I think we would have to discuss today is how do you develop your own unique story? How do you learn to connect with people? That's call for us. So I think in a few minutes he'll join us back. Then we'll take it from there. But if you have questions around storytelling, building confidence, connecting to your who you are trying to tell a story to, please ask your questions. Then we'll take it from there. Okay. In the comment section. So generally, I know young people have so many things, issues around story, whether it's even in the presentation, and we use stories in different ways. Even at work, as a professional, you need to make presentations, you need to write a report, you need to give a report on something that happened, or you need to pass a message across. So there are different ways we use stories. Some people have used stories to get jobs, right? There are some people who have told amazing stories that has landed them employment opportunities. There are some people, so there's different things we use stories for. So Amsley, I think you can hear me now. Can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. So I was trying to just give perspective to what you said in terms of connecting to the person, connecting to the community, building confidence. So now there's a key question, which is some people say they don't have stories, right? Whether it's to position themselves, get a job. Some people say they don't have stories. So how can people, is it true that people don't have stories? And if it is true, how can they develop such stories?
So, so if I hear you correctly, some people are saying that they don't have any story to tell. Life itself, the life experience itself is a story to tell. And see, when you go for job interviews and the potential employer is asking you, tell us about yourself. A lot of people most time would just say, oh, I went to this school, this is it. No, the person who wants to employ you wants you to tell him or her a personal story, take them through your journey and your story. And what that means is, and people usually want to connect with you and know if you're the kind of person they seek in their organization. So I'm sure, yeah, a lot of people go and do their background research. But what's important and one thing people miss is the culture of the organization. And in telling your story, you must also share how the culture resonates with you. So, for instance, when you tell your story about yourself, or when you share the story about yourself and how you fit into that job role, you must also be able to end by sharing an experience you've had that connects to the role you're applying for, or the role that the company have published for employment. I hear someone here asking, how do you learn the skills of telling story? You get good at telling story by telling more stories. So what I mean simply is, I didn't just get here today by telling story. The more you tell stories, the more you get better at it. And the easiest way to learn storytelling is calling your friends, or when you hang out with your friends, you use your friends or your family to learn. So you use them to tell stories and then ask them to give you feedback. Feedback is very important, from your friends and family and the people that you use to learn this skill. But in telling stories, the more you tell stories, the more you tell story makes you become someone who tells compelling stories. And it makes it easy as you progress in storytelling.
Okay, great. There's a question that does your story connect to every kind of audience? So, for example, you probably have different interviews for people in, let's say, two different industries, and you need a story to connect to the audience, or you are changing industries. Probably you're working in the development space before you want to go to consulting. Will your story connect to every kind of audience, or how are you sure that your story is connecting?
So I hear a question around the audience. Again, when you speak to various audience, you need to first also understand your audience. So for instance, I remember last year I was giving a talk to teenagers, to female teenagers who so it was the Day of the African Child, and I was asked to come and talk to teenagers. I think again, as a storyteller, you can never be overconfident. So that fateful day, I was supposed to talk to teenagers. Honestly, I had already put together my talking point. But when I climbed the stage and I looked at the faces of these young, promising girls, I said to myself, there's a way I'll speak to them, I'll send the wrong message, or they would be bored and lost interest. Guess what I talked about? I talked about menses. Yes, I talked about menstruation. I talked about menstruation, one, because men usually don't talk about menstruation. And I talked about menstruation from the perspective of me having a sister and having nieces, and how I support my sister when she's on her menses, and how I feel it's cool to go to the supermarket to buy pad. So, and they started smiling and they connected to the story. Because one, I've never experienced menses. I'm a man. But I was able to connect with them because I have a sister, and also share the experience that when my sister is on her menses, I go to the supermarket to help her buy pad. So I brought them into the story, and they were an audience that these are audience I don't usually speak on a regular basis. I see a question here, someone saying, as an accountant, how do I attach storytelling to my profession? My colleague Stefia, who is is the accountant of Connected Development, is now a brilliant storyteller. And what she does is, so we work in various grassroots communities, and in these communities, you do, for you to do retirement, you're working in communities where they don't give you receipts, where there's no receipt, where you take Okada for 2 hours just to access a community, or you rode canoe and you have to pay the Okada guy, you have to pay the canoe driver, and there's no receipt. So what Stefia has done was to create a system, an accounting system whereby we have an unreceipted form where we sign, where we fill on behalf of those people, and we get them to sign and put their phone number. So when Stefia now defend our accounts with either the external auditors or with our donor, she's able to connect with the fact and the reality that follow the money people work in communities where you don't even have internet or mobile service, where you don't even have machines that print receipts, because you're talking to people who work in a very formal system that every transaction there's always a receipt for it. So she's able to tell the story of how our accounting system is built on the people and the needs of the people that we serve, and connecting the fact that yes, we cannot provide you with receipts because there is no receipt, but we've built a system that is accountable. And for her, she ended by saying that it's all about trust, because if you trust us as donors to to give us resources to work, we also trust the community people and the champions we work with to have integrity to spend that money based on the mutual trust that we all benefit from. And these are the results that we're getting on the ground that connects to the grant, but most importantly, that builds a better society. So again,
Okay, great.
as a professional accountant, it's just for you to understand, what happens on the ground. And for Stefia, honestly speaking, also, because sometimes as accountant, you're just in the office and they send you all this documentation to do retirement. One thing we did was to expose Stefia to the realities of the ground. So we took her to community outreach so she can see and experience it. Because if you experience it, it's easy for you to tell the story and put yourself in the story.
Okay, great. So, experiencing what actually happens in terms of, so that's like an example in accounting. So some people think they're doing something that is really boring, but I guess there's probably a part of it that you can learn to connect with to tell your story in that line. There's a question that says, must every story be heroic, or must every story end heroic? Let's have your perspective on that.
Every story, what?
Must every story end heroic, like heroic, like as
No,
in hero?
no, no. So in telling stories, some stories will end in a very sad note. Some stories will make you cry, while some story would make you see someone like an icon. But for me, I try as much as possible to tell stories that give hope, that brings about prosperity. And maybe I can share one quick story about Unico Udoka Kalu. So Unico is currently on the call. I know he's watching us via Facebook. Where with Unico, we started Action Network. At that time, I was using social media to talk about how climate change is affecting young people and how communities are vulnerable. So there was an opportunity to represent Nigeria at the United Nations, and and I applied for that opportunity, but I needed a reference letter. So Unico, who was an advisor to the Nigerian Youth Climate Action Network and also a policy analyst with the International Center for Energy, Environment and Development. So I approached Unico and he signed that recommendation letter for me, which got me that representation at the United Nations. But why was he able to give me a reference? Was because of the fact that we work in the same space, but beyond working in the same space, we're able to translate the realities of young people and how climate change affects young people, and taking it to an international level at the United Nations in front of the Ministerial Council. So again, when you try to tell your story, and even if the story would end in a sad note, maybe like the Make Nigeria Stronger story of one campaign where a woman died from giving birth. But we used the story to inspire lawmakers and get citizens really, so we got citizens adrenaline pumped up to say that to make Nigeria stronger, we would do away with women giving birth and reducing maternal mortality or newborn mortality. airing that documentary and sharing the story of the man who was the husband of this woman, and airing it so that citizens will get agitated, but use that agitation in positive vibe to get lawmakers to compel lawmakers to pass the National Health Act that got signed. So every story has its own perspective. Again, I told you it's all about perspective, but story to inspire greatness and action from collective citizens.
Okay. Now, there's a question, and it's talking about, must you always tell your own stories? How can a person get stories? So at times people are trying to tell stories, but it may not be their story, but they're trying to pass a message to their advantage, or they need a story to drive home a point, but they don't have a story around that. How do they approach such issues? So you need to tell a story to get to pass a point, but you don't have a personal story.
Yes,
Is it
so
okay to copy people's
so
stories?
the person who asks, must you always put yourself in the story? Yes, so the person who asks, must you always put yourself in the story? If you don't tell your story, who will tell your story for you? Because see, for me, again, who will tell the story for me as Hamzat, or who will tell the story for Connected Development or Follow the Money? So yes, if you don't tell the story, and it's about also controlling the narrative and taking ownership of the narrative. Because if someone else tells your story, they can't tell it better than you. You are the best mouthpiece of yourself. And yes, how do you tell stories about people, especially people you want to represent very well? So for instance, if you go for a community outreach and you spend about 3 or 4 hours time with people and then you leave, the perspective you get will be different from someone who come into this community and sleep in the community for 2 days, and you cannot compare with the person who would spend a week. So for me, for you to get people to allow you tell their stories, you must be able to build trust, because there's a level of trust you build. People will then open up and share with you their story that you can then take and amplify. Because what I do and the kind of work we do at Code is amplify. And in getting those voices, it's building that trust. I remember my experience in sleeping in various communities. Because for me, if I go on an outreach, I try as much as possible to live in to experience the everyday life of these community members, because that's the best way you can tell their story, and that's the best way they can trust you, because anybody that you eat with and you sleep with in their own house, because when I go out, say, oh please, can I get a corner where I could just lay my head? If they see that, oh, you're actually living with them, you've eaten their food, you've bet their water, you drank their water, they would open up to you. And in the evening, usually when we sit under the community mango tree, or just by the corridor, that's when they open enough to tell you what they're experiencing in their community and what kind of help they think government could bring for them. But if you just go and spend 2 or 3 hours, you would not get the total perspective, and they will not even trust you as much as giving you their story to go and tell. And mind you, you're not the only one going to this community. I've been to communities where they say, oh, when I don't come again, oh, NGO people. But it is now left for you to manage that perspective and manage that expectation. So for me, in managing those expectations and trying to counter the narrative, is to ask them, can you give me a room to sleep? I want to sleep in your community. Because one, it would send a shocker to them. Because you're coming from the city center, or you're coming from the township, and you want to come and sleep in a community where there is no electricity, where there's bad road, where there's no security. And then when they see that really, you slept in the community, you ate breakfast with them, and the same thing they eat, even if they feel like, so again, if you're able to use the opportunity to build trust. You build mutual trust, and if anybody trusts you, they're able to open up and share their story and experience with you, which you then take to help influence and shape national and international policy, which that's my role.
Okay, so one more question is, young people are constantly looking for opportunities, right? There's a question here that says, how can we tell the stories of the vulnerable, like we are part of it? So two ways. You want to tell stories of vulnerable people, or you are a vulnerable person. So I think this question you are not part of it, but you want to tell a story like you are part of it. Then also, if you are telling a vulnerable story for yourself, is it best to tell a story that makes you vulnerable for yourself? Then also the question that says, telling stories of other people like you are part of it. Hope you get my question.
So for me, yeah, I get your question. For me, it's about being selfless. So if you want to talk about vulnerability, everyone is vulnerable. You know, there are different category of vulnerability. So a lot of people who see you with your mobile phone and you're able to connect to this Facebook Live, some people will see you and say you're elitic. The fact that you have a mobile phone and then you can access internet, you're elitic. But then there are different layers of vulnerability. And when you look at social status, again, there are different level of vulnerability. But here, what's important is being conscious and being selfless. Sometimes, even when you tell the story, you take a back seat. Yes, you're in the picture, but you take a back seat and bring the issue of someone who is much more vulnerable and who does not have access or opportunities like you, and sell the person's story to give hope and draw attention to that particular issue. Again, you must also be sensitive to the issues that the country is currently debating. So, for instance, you want to launch a campaign about, maybe you want to launch a campaign about, let's say you want to launch a campaign around access to education. But then the conversation ongoing talks about gender-based violence, sexual and gender-based violence. When you talk about stories and when you bring your issues to the front burner, you must also gauge what kind of conversation is happening. It's now the right time to tell the stories, because there are stories you tell, in as much as it is compelling, it is impactful, and it needs urgent attention. If you don't connect yourself to the current vibes of of the room, then a lot of people will lose interest in that kind of narrative. Or you also tweak your story in a way that it connects to the issues that are trendy. So does it connect to gender and sexual based violence? And how does your story brings about results and brings about call to action so that you can mobilize mass amount of people? But ultimately, you want to tell someone else's story, and then the picture is to build trust. Because again, if you tell the story and you don't tell it very well, it means that you're misrepresenting the person you're trying to amplify their voice.
Okay. So someone says, what tools does it take to craft an efficient story? Are there tools you need to craft an efficient story, especially when you are not the storytelling type of person? So, for example, you know you need stories, but you're not the story type of person, storytelling telling type of
So,
person. So, how do you craft an efficient story?
so for me, and if you follow me very well on social media, and even when I speak publicly, I don't use PowerPoint. So again, it depends on what works for you or what you can relate with. For me, I take pictures. I love pictures. I love taking pictures on my smartphone. For me, I take pictures and I use my pictures to tell stories. So if you see my slide when I talk publicly, if I have the opportunity to portray a slide, and in telling story, you must prepare yourself again. There are speaking opportunities where, so for instance, you go for a job interview, you don't have opportunity of slide. They won't give you any slide, PowerPoint slide to an opportunity for you to make a PowerPoint slide. So you must prepare yourself to tell stories even without visuals. But for me, I like telling stories and attaching pictures to it. So I just show you a picture, I take you through, the story around the picture, and get people really excited about it. So for me, again, to you, it's about what you can relate with. Some people tell stories, with 1 or 2 minutes short video documentary. They just show you a short video without sound, and then they come on the stage and then tell you the story about the video. Some people will put sound, some people would use illustration, some people would even draw. But for me, I tell my own stories taking pictures of people, humanizing people, everyday life in communities, and then showcase those pictures and tell you the story around that person, and how I connected with the person, and the message that the person have given me to the world and the audience.
Okay. Someone says, what prompted you to go into storytelling, and how can one build a career from storytelling?
So for me, my career is not. Yes, I'm a storyteller, but that's not my career. I'm an activist, and in activism, for me, it's about telling stories and bringing about social change using storytelling. How can you how can you how can you start telling stories, or crafting your career around storytelling? It's first for you to accept that life itself is about stories. Because when we sit down back in the days with our grandparents, we're actually talking about this came before us. Storytelling itself came before us. Tales by moonlight. When we sit, in the evening, at the foot of our grandparents, they take us through this history and story. They take us through the history and stories of our villages. So in doing that, it keeps a lasting memory, because storytelling keeps a lasting memory in your mind. When you tell story, people keep it in their mind rather than just reading books, or just listening to news. So for me, and how can you build your career around story? You can actually build it. There's a lot of people who are storytellers, so their job is just to tell stories and they make living out of it. It's just for you again to ask yourself, what do you want to be, and what niche do you want to craft for yourself? For me, I'm an activist, and I tell stories through my activism.
Okay. So another question is, some people believe they have stories, they have ideas, and they have solutions. However, they don't necessarily have an avenue to tell such stories, or they don't have an avenue to sell themselves. What would be your advice for people like that?
So you have a
They
story,
believe they have
or
stories to tell.
you have ideas. You don't have a platform to showcase your ideas or your stories. So what I tell these people is, before the advent of Facebook and Twitter and other social media platform, you have to pay to advertise yourself, or you have to pay to go to some events. Now, even with COVID-19, the series of Zoom meetings and whatnot. So what I tell people is, create those opportunities for yourself. Because really, who are you expecting to create that opportunity for you? So I tell people that, you think you have a solution, start implementing it. Do not wait, because a lot of people think that, oh, I need investment, I need funding to do this. No, you don't need funding, you don't need no investment. All you need to do is start. And if you're able to convince one person to believe in your vision, and how do you start if you cannot convince your immediate family and friends? And then how can you convince people who are external? So first, you start from the home by convincing your immediate family and friends. And where do you think your first funding or resources will come from? Your family or friends. So if you can convince them, and they buy and tie into your vision, and that's your solution and story, then they invest in you, and little by little, gradually you would grow. And as you grow, you can then tell story of how you started, what you did. And like I started, I was a cafe boy. I did cafe attendance. I was a school teacher. And all those experience actually helped me and shaped me to who I am today and what I want to be in the future. But first, you have to tell yourself the ultimate truth, because no one, even if people lie to you, you cannot lie to yourself.
Okay, great. So I think we that will be it for today. Any final words, advice to job seekers, people looking for careers, both in the development space and in corporate other spaces? Then, what's your final word for people today?
So my final word for young people is, you need skills, you need opportunities, yes, you need exposure, but you also need to understand the kind of event that connects to the kind of career that you want. So I'll give you one example. Last year or so, the governor of Kaduna State hosted a summit, an economic investment at the summit. There was a session that talks about the environment and the opportunities in the state around environment. There was a young lady, her name is Sakinat. I can't remember her full name, but she's on social media. Her name is Sakinat. And she rose her hand and took the mic and she asked a very inspiring question to the governor and the panelists, that puts the governor in an uncomfortable situation. And guess the response of the governor, that for her to ask that question, it means she has ideas and solutions to tackle the problem. and offered her a special advisor job in the hall on the go. And this was a lady that just finished her NYSC. So again, what happened there was she saw the avenue as an opportunity to engage, but she engaged constructively and not bringing an issue around maybe healthcare in an environmental panel session. The session was about environment, it's about the state, and then she now asked a question around the abnormalities in the state around environment, and also ended with what she thinks the government can do. And in responding, the government offered her a job, and today she's a special advisor to the governor on environment. So young people, understand the kind of events that connect you to this opportunity and people who would help shape your career and give you opportunity, either employability opportunity, or even give you grants or give you loan or credit or fund that big idea that you have. But in doing this, we need to understand that the future belongs and the future is in our hands. So expose yourself to all the skills you can get, and believe you me, no skill is a waste.
Okay, great. So thanks a lot, Amzi. I'll just do a little recap of all that you said. So I think we've talked a lot on storytelling today. We've talked about first how you need to learn how to connect with the person or the people you are trying to tell stories, how to connect to your community. We also talked about you being in the center of the story and also you being able to take the back seat. Then we talked about going out, volunteering, just learn because it's something that is learned by experience. So you learn how to tell stories by telling more stories. And we said the first start point should be your friends and family. So if you are not able to tell the right stories to convince friends and family, then how would you tell stories to convince an outsider? Then we went into examples of people who are able to who were able to, through the experience, ask. You gave the example of someone that asked a key question that gave her an opportunity. So opportunities actually abound, but we need to see, okay, how can we understand ourselves? You talked about self-awareness. How can we know, oh, this is the kind of person I am, this is the kind of work I want to do, this is how I want to channel my career, this is how I want to grow my career, such that we know the right stories to tell in that perspective. So I think it's really been an amazing session today. Thanks a lot, Amzi, for today. That will be it for today. Thanks a lot. We are super grateful. And thanks for all the work you do around telling stories for marginalized communities. Yes,
Okay,
thanks a
thank
lot.
you. And all of you follow me on Twitter. My handle is Hamsi Code. Yes, I'm looking for followers. Bye bye now.
Okay, so taking it up from here, that was an amazing session. I've done a little bit of what we discussed today. So let me just give you some announcements. One is um, Jobberman is putting together a virtual career fair. So for many of us, I know we're in a pandemic, people are looking for opportunities, people are looking for jobs, and Jobberman is organizing a major career fair, which is the virtual career fair. But now, how can you join this career fair, or how can you leverage on these opportunities? First of all, I would say you need to sign up on Jobberman. Why? Because if you are not in that community, if you don't know what is happening in Jobberman, you may not be able to benefit from these opportunities. Also, there are also always job opportunities on the platform. Before I even give you details of the career fair, there are a number of job opportunities, but to get access to them, you need to sign up. We have opportunities with Student Hub, with Novatia Translations, with City Tutors, with Pocket Farm, with Verify Me, with Cornerstone. So young people are always looking for jobs, but there are always jobs. And you just need to know how to tell your story and how to find the right opportunities. Cool. Now, talking about the virtual career fair, it's the largest virtual career fair you ever have seen. I'm not sure I have seen any virtual career fair in Nigeria, but you can be sure that this virtual career fair is going to be one of the largest you would see. It's going to be happening on the 30th of September, and it's going to be strictly for people who have passed through Jobberman soft skills training. So how can you participate in this career fair? One thing you can be sure is that so many employers will be in this career fair. People will be hired during that career fair. But however, you need to have been upskilled. You need to have learned emotional intelligence. You need to have learned presentation and storytelling. You need to have learned employability skills. You need to have learned personal effectiveness. So to participate in this career fair, you need to have gone through the Jobberman free soft skills training, which is going on presently. You can join by going to www.jobberman.com/soft skills. And if you have any questions, send us an email, connect@jobberman.com. So that is it for today. I hope we've learned a lot. I hope you go to the Jobberman's platform to register and start applying for relevant opportunities. If you want to get across to us, you can reach out to us through our email, connect@jobberman.com, through LinkedIn, through our Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook page, and our website, www.jobberman.com/youth engagement. So thanks a lot for today. I think it was a really enlightening session. So thank you very much. Yeah.